Sirens wailed through the crisp morning air as Officer Daniel Hart pulled his cruiser into the narrow alleyway behind a downtown cafe. He'd been on the force for 7 years, long enough to believe he could spot trouble from a mile away. And today, trouble looked like a man in an old gray hoodie, sitting alone with a duffel bag beside him. "Dispatch, possible suspect matching the robbery description," Daniel said into his radio, stepping out of the car. Male, mid-40s, about 6 feet, dark hair, possibly armed. The man looked up as Daniel approached. Calm, collected, not startled at all. "Good morning, officer," he said in a deep, even tone. Daniel's instincts kicked in. Too calm, too polite. He must be hiding something. "Step away from the bag, sir," Daniel ordered, hand resting on his holster. "Now." The man slowly stood, raising his hands. "Is there a problem?" "We got a call about a break-in 3 blocks down," Daniel said. "You fit the description." The man gave a faint, incredulous smile. "A gray hoodie? That's the description." "Sir, I'm not going to argue with you. Turn around." Hands on the wall. There was a flicker of hesitation. Then the man obeyed. Daniel cuffed him, checking his bag. Inside, a neatly pressed shirt, a pair of dress shoes, and a folder labeled Internal Affairs, Confidential. Daniel frowned. "What's this?" "Work papers," the man said. "I was on my way to the station." "Sure you were." Daniel radioed in. "Suspect in custody. Bringing him in." At the precinct, heads turned as Daniel walked in with his suspect. The man didn't protest or struggle. He simply looked around, eyes scanning the officers, the desks, the photos on the wall, all with quiet, unsettling awareness. "Booking rooms over here," Daniel said, nudging him forward. But before he could process the paperwork, Sergeant Morris, his superior, came striding over, eyebrows furrowed. "Hart, what the hell are you doing?" Morris demanded. "Bringing in a suspect from the West End call," Daniel replied. "Guy was acting suspicious, carrying confidential files." Morris blinked. Then, slowly, his expression changed from irritation to horror. "Take those cuffs off. Now." Daniel froze. "Sir." "I said now, officer." Morris barked. Daniel fumbled with the keys, confusion turning to dread. The man rubbed his wrists as the cuffs clicked open. Morris turned to him, standing straighter. "Chief Langford, I am so sorry for this. I had no idea you were arriving today." The entire room went silent. Daniel's mouth went dry. "See, Chief?" he stammered. The man, "No, the chief," looked at him with calm, cold eyes. "That's right. Chief Marcus Langford. I was due to report for my first day of command this morning." Morris swallowed. "Sir, this is—" Langford raised a hand. "No need, Sergeant. I've seen enough." He turned to Daniel. "You must be Officer Hart, correct? I read your file. Ambitious, disciplined, has a tendency to act on instinct." Daniel couldn't speak. His stomach churned. Langford adjusted his cufflinks, the same ones Daniel had mistaken for cheap metal moments ago. "Congratulations, officer. You've just made the most memorable first impression of my career." The room buzzed with whispers as Langford walked past them toward his new office. Daniel stood frozen, watching the man he'd just handcuffed disappear into the chief's door. Sergeant Morris leaned in. "Hart, you just arrested your new boss." Daniel muttered. "I thought he fit the description." Morris sighed. "Yeah, well, you better hope he's the forgiving type. Because if he's not, you'll be lucky to be writing parking tickets by next week." An hour later, Daniel was called into the chief's office. Langford sat behind his desk, reviewing reports, his demeanor calm but unreadable. The gold nameplate gleamed. Chief Marcus Langford. "Sit down, Officer Hart." Daniel obeyed. Langford didn't look up. "Tell me, do you always arrest people based on fashion choices?" "Sir, or was it the duffel bag?" Langford continued smoothly. Because if it's that, I'll make sure no one in the department ever carries one again. Daniel swallowed hard. It was my mistake, sir. I acted too quickly. Langford leaned back in his chair, finally meeting his eyes. You acted on assumption. And in our line of work, assumptions get people killed. Yes, sir. I read your service record, Langford said. You've got potential. But potential without judgment is a weapon without aim. Daniel didn't argue. He couldn't. Langford tapped his pen against the desk, then smiled faintly. Tell me something, officer. Do you know why I was in that alley? Daniel shook his head. I was observing, seeing how my team handles the public, how they treat strangers. I wanted to understand this precinct before I walked in wearing a badge that outranks everyone. He paused, his tone tightening. Now I know. Daniel lowered his eyes. I'm sorry, sir. Langford studied him for a moment, then stood. Apologies don't fix instincts. Actions do. So here's what we'll do. You're reassigned. Daniel's heart sank. Reassigned? Yes, Langford said. Effective immediately, you'll serve as my driver and aide for the next 6 months. If you're lucky, you'll learn something about restraint along the way. As Daniel left the office, whispers followed him again. Some snickered, others pitied him, but deep down, beneath the embarrassment, a flicker of something else stirred, determination. Because one thing Daniel Hart never did was quit. And if this new chief thought he could break him, he was in for a surprise. The next morning, Daniel Hart arrived at headquarters 15 minutes early. Dressed sharply, boots polished, posture straight. The whispers from yesterday still floated around the station like smoke. Everyone had heard what happened. Every joke ended with the same punchline. Hart cuffed the new chief. He ignored it all. If he was going to fix this, he'd do it by showing up and doing the job. When Chief Langford entered, the entire floor straightened. The man didn't walk, he commanded the space. His uniform was crisp, his gaze sharp but composed. Hart, Langford said, stopping in front of him. You're driving today. Keys. Daniel handed them over. Yes, sir. The car's ready. Good. Langford gestured toward the exit. Let's go. We've got a lot to cover. As they drove through the city, Daniel kept his eyes on the road. The silence inside the car felt heavier than the engine's hum. Finally, Langford spoke. Tell me, Officer Hart, what's the first duty of a cop? Daniel hesitated. To protect the public, sir. Wrong, Langford said, his tone even but firm. The first duty of a cop is to listen. You can't protect what you don't understand. You saw a man in an alley and heard a report about a suspect. You didn't listen to your instincts. You let your assumptions do the talking. Daniel swallowed. You're right, sir. Langford looked out the window. You remind me of myself when I started. Young, proud, convinced I could read a man in 5 seconds. Then I made a mistake that cost someone their life. Daniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened. What happened? Langford's voice softened. I stopped a man once. Looked nervous, kept reaching for his pocket. I thought he was armed. He wasn't. He was deaf, trying to show me his ID. Daniel didn't say a word. Langford turned toward him. That's when I learned. Instincts aren't about acting fast. They're about knowing when not to. They arrived at the precinct's community center, a rough neighborhood where uniformed officers stood outside distributing flyers about a safety initiative. Langford stepped out first, his posture relaxed yet authoritative. The locals recognized him. Some nodded, others approached to talk. He greeted everyone with respect, no matter their background. Daniel followed a few steps behind, feeling strangely out of place. As Langford chatted with a group of kids, Daniel noticed an older woman nearby struggling with groceries. Without thinking, he rushed over. Ma'am, let me help you. She smiled gratefully. Thank you, officer. You're new here. Sort of, Daniel said with a faint grin. Trying to make things right. Langford watched from a distance, quietly observing. Later, as they walked back to the car, the chief said, "You see that woman you helped?" "Yes, sir. She's Mrs. Alvarez. Her grandson was shot last year, wrong place, wrong time. You just made her feel safe around a badge again. That's what policing is. It's not arrests, it's trust." Daniel nodded, absorbing every word. Back at headquarters, Langford handed him a stack of case files. "Read these. Cold cases, petty thefts, old complaints. I want your perspective." Daniel frowned. "Sir, these go back years. Why not assign someone in records?" Langford gave a small smile. "Because those reports aren't about evidence. They're about people. Every file you read is a story of someone who didn't get justice. I want you to remember their names." Daniel looked down at the folders, more than 50. It was grunt work, busy work, but something in Langford's tone made him realize it wasn't punishment. It was a lesson. Days passed. Daniel spent hours reading reports. Robberies that went unsolved. Assault victims who never saw closure. He began to notice patterns. Missed details, overlooked witnesses, ignored statements. And in every margin he saw a signature. Approved by Chief Marcus Langford. It hit him like a punch. These weren't random. These were Langford's own old cases. The chief was testing him, not just his diligence but his understanding. That night, Daniel stayed late at his desk, highlighting notes, marking inconsistencies, writing down insights. He didn't leave until dawn. The next morning, Langford entered the precinct and found Daniel waiting in his office, eyes tired but determined. "You've read them all?" Langford asked. "Yes, sir," Daniel said. "And I think I know what you're showing me." Langford raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "These cases," Daniel said slowly, "they're full of small things that people ignored. A statement from a janitor, a tip from a store clerk, a surveillance gap no one followed up on. It's not about mistakes. It's about pride. Officers thought they were too good to listen to nobodies." Langford smiled faintly. "Exactly. Pride is louder than truth. You can't lead men who think their badge makes them smarter than the people they serve." Daniel nodded, his voice steady. "I understand now, sir." Langford leaned back in his chair. "Do you?" He looked directly at Daniel. "Because understanding isn't the same as living it." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Langford stood. "You're coming with me. There's a call downtown. A disturbance at the courthouse. Let's see if you've learned anything yet." As they headed to the car, Daniel's heart raced. This wasn't just a test anymore. It was redemption, a chance to prove that he'd grown beyond his mistakes. He had no idea that what waited at that courthouse would change both their lives again. Because this time it wouldn't be the chief teaching the lesson. It would be fate. The courthouse was a swirl of chaos when Daniel and Chief Langford arrived. Reporters shouted questions from the steps, cameras flashed, and uniformed officers struggled to keep the crowd back. "Sir," a young officer ran up, nervous and sweating. "We've got a protest inside the main lobby. Some construction workers say they've been unpaid for months and took over the hearing room. No one's hurt, but tensions are high." Langford nodded calmly. "Who's negotiating?" "Detective Myers," the officer said. "But he's losing control. They're demanding to speak directly with someone in charge." Langford's eyes flicked toward Daniel. "Guess that's us." They walked inside together, Langford leading, Daniel following close behind. The courthouse lobby was filled with shouting. A group of men in work vests stood in a loose circle, holding papers, demanding justice. At the center of it all, a man with calloused hands and tear-streaked cheeks slammed his fist against the bench. "They said the city owed us overtime. We got nothing. Not a dollar," he shouted. A few officers stood nearby, hands on their holsters, too tense, too ready to escalate. Langford raised his voice, steady but commanding. "Everyone lower your weapons. That's an order." The officers froze instantly. Then he stepped forward, removing his hat. "Gentlemen," he said, "I'm Chief Marcus Langford. You have my word no one here will get hurt. Now let's talk like men who work for a living." The crowd quieted, surprised by his tone. The man who'd been shouting looked at him skeptically. "You don't know what it's like, Chief. We got families. We've been waiting 6 months for paychecks. My wife's been pawning jewelry just to keep the lights on." Langford nodded. "You're right. I don't know your struggle. But I know this: anger makes bad men out of good ones. Let's make sure that's not how this ends." For the first time, the man lowered his fists. Daniel stood nearby, watching, absorbing. Langford wasn't just talking to them. He was listening. Then suddenly, a commotion erupted near the entrance. One of the younger workers shoved an officer who'd tried to move him back. The officer reacted instantly, drawing his taser. "Drop it!" Daniel barked, stepping in front of the officer. "No one's using weapons here." The officer hesitated. "He shoved me, Hart." Daniel glared. "And now you'll escalate it? You want to be the guy who tossed a hungry father in a courthouse." The taser lowered slowly. Langford gave Daniel a small, approving nod. Then he turned to the workers. "Who's your foreman?" A tall man stepped forward. "That'd be me. Luis Ortega." "Luis," Langford said, "you've got every right to be angry. But I also know the paperwork for those city contracts got jammed up months ago, and it's my job now to untangle it. You have my word, your case will be reviewed by the end of this week." The men exchanged uncertain glances. "How do we know you mean it?" one asked. Langford smiled faintly. "Because the last man who doubted my word spent the next 6 months driving me around the city." The workers chuckled nervously. The tension broke. Daniel couldn't help but smirk. Within minutes, the group dispersed peacefully. Officers collected statements, and the courthouse slowly returned to order. Outside, Daniel exhaled deeply. "That could have gone bad fast." Langford nodded. "It usually does, when pride replaces patience." Daniel looked at him. "You handled that perfectly. You didn't bark orders. You didn't threaten. You just talked." Langford gave a small grin. "That's because talking isn't weakness. It's control." He paused, his tone turning serious. "And you showed restraint today. That officer was about to pull the trigger, and you stopped him the right way, not by shouting, but by reminding him what it means to wear that badge." "Thank you, sir." Langford studied him for a moment. "You're learning, Hart. Maybe there's hope for you yet." That evening, back at the precinct, Langford called Daniel into his office again. The door shut quietly behind him. "I've got something I want you to see," Langford said, sliding a file across the desk. Daniel opened it. It was a personnel record. His own. Promotions. Disciplinary notes. Evaluations. And then, at the bottom, a new section, recommended for field leadership training. Daniel's eyes widened. "Sir, this is..." Langford cut him off. "Don't thank me. You haven't earned it yet. This is an opportunity, not a reward. What you did today, that's the kind of decision-making I need in leaders. But remember, one good day doesn't erase bad habits." Daniel nodded. "Understood." Langford leaned back. "You're dismissed. Get some rest. Tomorrow you're joining me on another call. Something tells me we're just getting started." Daniel left the office, the file still in his hands. For the first time since he'd made that humiliating mistake, he felt something that had been missing for weeks: respect. Not from others, from himself. But as he reached the locker room, he overheard 2 officers whispering. "Guess Hart's cozy with the new chief now. Arrest a guy one day, get promoted the next." Yeah, talk about luck. He ignored it, but the sting remained. He wasn't after luck, he was after redemption. And he was beginning to realize that Chief Langford might be the one man capable of teaching him what redemption really looked like. That night, as Daniel drove home under the orange glow of streetlights, his radio crackled. A voice came through, nervous, trembling. Dispatch to all units, shots fired. Officer down. Location, East Side Precinct Lot. Chief Langford possibly on scene. Daniel's heart stopped. He slammed the brakes, spun the car around, and floored it toward the flashing lights that now painted the sky. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness as Daniel's patrol car screeched into the East Side Precinct Lot. Officers were shouting into radios, ducking behind vehicles, the tension thick enough to choke on. He jumped out before the car stopped rolling. "What happened?" he barked at the first officer he saw. "Ambush, sir," the young cop gasped. Chief Langford came to meet an informant. 2 armed suspects opened fire from the alley. Daniel's blood ran cold. "Where's the chief?" The officer pointed toward a parked black SUV, its door riddled with bullet holes. "Behind that vehicle, we think he's hit." Daniel didn't wait. He sprinted across the lot, his boots splashing through puddles, bullets from somewhere pinging off the nearby wall. He dove behind the SUV, scanning the ground. Langford was there, slumped against the tire, his uniform dark with blood near his shoulder. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes were still sharp. "Chief!" Daniel dropped to his knees. "Stay with me." Langford gritted his teeth. Don't you dare call an ambulance until you get them." "Sir, you're bleeding out." Langford's hand shot up, gripping Daniel's wrist with surprising strength. "Heart. Focus." One of them ran into the old boiler room, northeast corner. The others still somewhere up top. "Don't let them get away." Daniel hesitated, torn between duty and fear. Langford's eyes locked onto his. "You said you wanted redemption. This is it. Go finish it." Daniel took a breath, nodded, and moved. The boiler room was a maze of shadows and dripping pipes. The smell of oil and rust burned in his nose. He moved slowly, weapon drawn, ears tuned to every echo. A sound, a footstep, metal scraping. "Police!" Daniel shouted. "Drop your weapon." No answer, just movement, fast. Daniel turned the corner. A man in a dark jacket raised his gun. The shot cracked through the air. Daniel dove sideways, the bullet grazing his sleeve. He fired back once, clean and controlled. The suspect collapsed. The gun clattered away. Daniel stood there, breathing hard, the adrenaline pounding in his skull. He pressed his radio. "One suspect down. Second unknown." "Copy," a voice replied. "SWAT inbound. Chief's in critical condition." Daniel's jaw tightened. He wasn't done yet. He climbed the metal stairs to the upper catwalk. Every step echoed like a gunshot. Then he saw movement near the broken window. The second shooter trying to slip out. "Stop!" Daniel shouted. The man froze, half-turned, weapon still in his hand. "You don't want to do this, cop." "You already made that choice," Daniel said, steadying his aim. The man smirked. "You think you're a hero? You're just another guy who doesn't know when to quit." "Maybe," Daniel said, ice cold. "But I know how to stand my ground." The man fired first, Daniel fired back. Both shots rang out almost at once. Then silence. Daniel's arm burned. The bullet had grazed him, but the suspect was down. By the time the medics arrived, the scene was secure. Langford was conscious but pale. He was being loaded into an ambulance when Daniel approached. "Suspects neutralized," Daniel reported, voice steady despite the blood on his sleeve. Langford looked at him, his face pale but proud. "You did good, Hart." Daniel shook his head. "Not good enough. You almost died because of me." Langford chuckled weakly. "No. I almost died because this city never learns. But you're learning." The chief's hand gripped his arm again. "You've got leadership in you. Don't waste it trying to prove something to everyone else. Prove it to yourself." Daniel swallowed hard. "You're going to make it, sir." Langford smirked. "Of course I am. I still have to promote you for saving my life." Even in the chaos, Daniel couldn't help but laugh. Hours later, as dawn broke over the city, Daniel stood outside the hospital. The sky was pale gold, the kind of morning that felt like a reset. Langford was in surgery. The entire department was quiet, waiting. Then the hospital doors opened, and a nurse stepped out. "He's stable," she said softly. "He asked for you." Daniel went in. Inside the dim hospital room, Langford lay hooked up to machines, his shoulder bandaged. He looked weaker but not defeated. "You kept the badge clean tonight," he said slowly. "I couldn't ask for more." Daniel stood at attention, then relaxed. "Sir, I learned something from you." Langford's brow lifted. "Oh yeah? What's that?" "That control isn't power. It's purpose. You can't lead if you can't listen. And you can't protect people you don't respect." Langford smiled faintly. "Now you sound like a chief." Daniel chuckled. "Not yet. Soon," Langford whispered. "You'll see." Outside, the sunrise painted the station walls gold. Officers gathered around Daniel, clapping his back, calling him hero. But Daniel didn't feel like one. He just felt ready. He looked up at the flag above the precinct, fluttering against the morning light, and thought about how fast one mistake had turned into a lesson that would define his life. 2 months later, the precinct was buzzing again. But this time, not from gunfire or sirens. Cameras lined the hallway, reporters whispered, and a podium stood ready beneath a banner that read, "Promotion Ceremony, City Police Department." Daniel Hart adjusted his tie, a rare sight for the man who used to wear wrinkled uniforms and tired eyes. Today, the badge on his chest gleamed like it had been waiting for this day all along. He stood near the back of the room, uneasy in the crowd. He still wasn't used to the attention. Officers nodded as he passed, some with genuine pride, others with quiet envy. At the front, Chief Langford entered with his arm in a sling, a scar visible on his neck but a spark still in his eyes. The crowd stood and applauded. He motioned for silence, his voice firm but warm. "Today, we honor an officer who reminded us what integrity looks like. Not in words, but in actions." Daniel's pulse quickened. Langford continued, "When I first met Officer Hart, I saw a man who made mistakes, a man who thought order meant control. But what he showed me was courage. He stood when it mattered most. And he reminded us all that real leadership begins with humility." Langford paused, smiled, then lifted a folder. "Effective immediately, Captain Daniel Hart, Head of Internal Investigations." The applause that followed shook the room. Daniel froze. His throat tightened as he walked to the podium, saluting sharply before taking the microphone. "Thank you, Chief," he began quietly. "But if I've learned anything these past months, it's that no title changes who you are. It just gives you more chances to do the right thing." He glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of rookies and veterans alike. "We wear badges, but that doesn't make us better than anyone. It makes us responsible for every life we touch, every choice we make." Langford nodded approvingly. Daniel's voice softened. "And sometimes the people we judge too quickly, they're the ones who remind us what this job is really about." He stepped back, and the applause came again, louder this time. Not for rank, but for redemption. That night, long after the ceremony ended, Daniel returned to the quiet parking lot outside the precinct. The air was cool, and the city hummed softly in the distance. He saw a man sitting on the curb, worn clothes, rough hands, a plastic bag at his side. A younger Daniel might have seen a problem, but this time he saw a person. "You okay, sir?" Daniel asked gently. The man nodded, surprised by the kindness. "Just waiting for the shelter van." Daniel handed him a cup of coffee he'd picked up on the way. "Take it. You'll need it more than me." The man accepted it with a trembling smile. "Thank you, officer." Daniel hesitated, then said, "You know, you remind me of someone who once taught me more than any academy ever could." The man looked puzzled. "Oh yeah? Who?" Daniel smiled faintly. A stranger who turned out to be the chief. The following week, Langford retired quietly. The department held a small farewell. No press, no cameras, just family. Daniel stood beside him as they walked through the old hallway one last time. Langford chuckled. You know, Hart, I used to think a man's worth was measured by how many people salute him. And now? Daniel asked. Now I know it's about how many people he helped stand taller. They stopped by the plaque on the wall. In honor of those who serve with integrity. Langford placed his hand on it. You belong here, Daniel. Not because you saved me, but because you saved yourself. Daniel blinked away the emotion. You were right, Chief. Redemption doesn't come with a badge. It comes with what you do after you've lost everything. Langford grinned. Told you you'd sound like a chief one day. They shook hands, mentor and student equal at last. Months later, Daniel stood in the same courtroom where his story had nearly ended. Not as a defendant, but as a witness in a corruption trial. He looked around at the people he once thought were untouchable. Officers, politicians, names with power, and realized none of them mattered more than the truth. When the judge asked if he had anything to add, Daniel stood tall. Yes, Your Honor. Just one thing. Respect isn't taken, it's earned. And justice doesn't start in the courtroom. It starts in the mirror. The room fell silent. Later that evening, Daniel visited Langford's home. The old chief was sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunset. Daniel handed him an envelope. What's this? Langford asked. My application. For chief of police. Langford's smile was quiet, knowing. And what makes you think you're ready? Daniel looked out at the horizon. Because I finally understand the job isn't about power. It's about service. Langford nodded slowly. Then you're more than ready. The sun dipped low, washing the sky in amber light. For a long moment, neither man spoke. They didn't need to, because sometimes, the greatest victory isn't in clearing your name. It's in earning the right to wear it proudly again. And as the city lights flickered to life, Daniel Hart, once the man in handcuffs, now the man with a purpose, finally allowed himself to breathe. The badge on his chest caught the fading light, glinting like a promise kept.